Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. Tonight, we have an event that I have been waiting with anticipation to get to bring to all of you, and I am so excited. So we are here to celebrate. Drum roll, please. Just do it with me so that you have the same effect in your household as well. But we are here to celebrate The Mask of Mirrors by MA Carrick. And did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Yes! Oh my gosh, sorry. But, so MA Carrick is the joint pen name of Marie Brennan, who's the author of the Memoirs of Lady Trent, which is a phenomenal dragon adventure, just chef's kiss, as well as Alyc Helms, who is the author of Adventures of Mr. Mystique, and they are going to be in conversation with Christopher Paolini, who is the author of the Eragon series, as well as the sci-fi novel To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Now, I am so excited. This book is the kind of book that makes all of us very excited at Mysterious Galaxy. You have political intrigue, you have fantasy, you have dream magic, you of course have a character who is a little shady. Not necessarily starting off with the highest of morals. There might be some thievery, there might be the goal to just get lots of money. But of course, from that, an adventure will come where there is lots of dangerous magic, and the saving of this amazing world will be on our unlikely hero's shoulders. I am now going to pass it off to Christopher. But before I do the Vanna White section, just very, very quickly, as many of you know, we have ye old chat section to the right-hand side. And if you have a question, if you look down below, you'll see where it says ask a question, as that would imply. That is where you can ask our authors your questions. Make sure you take advantage of that, because events are so much fun, because you actually get to ask what questions you have. The authors are at your mercy. And then also, the best way to support a book so that you can get book 2, because I know I already want to read book 2, is to purchase this amazing book. And what is even more special is we actually have not only signed, oh no, but you can also get a signed and personalized copy of this book. So if you would like to do so, there is a buy signed book. And if you click that button after the event, it will take you away to a magical list on our website that has all of the author's books. So I am going to go ahead, pass it off to Christopher. Have an absolutely amazing event, and I will see you guys at the end. Bye!
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm getting some interesting feedback here. I'm hearing myself for some reason. So if I lose my train of thought, that's why. But it is an absolute honor to be talking with both of you today. The joint pair of MA Carrick. So first of all, congratulations on the launch of your book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I have to ask, where does the name MA Carrick come from? I think I can guess the first two parts.
Yeah, I'm the A. I'm the M. Alyc is the A. No, the quick spiel that I tell people is, we knew that we might be asked to come up with a joint name, and so I was like, okay, well, looking at family trees, maybe try to pull a name out of my lineage, one out of Alyc. How did James S.A. Corey do it? So I go look that up, and James is one of their middle names, and Corey is the other one's middle name, and I said that would make us Marie. So we're not doing that. And then I thought, we met actually at an archaeological field school, which is where little baby archaeologists go to learn how to dig. That a good chunk of it was in Wales at a place called Castell Henllys. But I knew the Henllys, we would constantly be trying to say the Welsh double L, and that was a bad idea. Castell is the Welsh word for castle. That seemed a little too on the nose for fantasy writing. But part of the field school was in a town in Ireland called Carrickmacross, which was too long, but I was like, it could be MA Cross, but MA Carrick sounds a little better. God, I hope Alyc likes this when I send it to them in the morning, because I'm thinking this up like while I'm brushing my teeth on my way to bed, and I was instantly attached to it and going, well, that's our pen name in my head now anyway. So I sent it to Alyc, who can tell their side of it.
And we have like different schedules, because Marie is very much a night owl, and I'm very much an early morning writer person. And so I get the chat in the morning from Marie, and she's like, I wonder if you can guess what the etymology of this is. And MA Carrick, and I was like, Carrickmacross, of course. And that's even better, because it's like MA is a cross and Carrick, so MA Carrickmacross. And so I was very excited about it. She was like, I didn't even think of that. So it has layers of meaning.
Yes.
Wow. Well, that goes a long way toward explaining why the two of you are writing together, and then also it raises so many world building questions about, you know, etymology and just your whole thought process between writing a story like this. So for those who don't know, because I know the book just came out, and I'm going to put you both on the spot. What is the elevator pitch?
So you're actually putting me on the spot because I consistently lose the Rochambeau on this one. But so the elevator pitch is, our book is The Mask of Mirrors, which is the story of Alta Renata Viroudux, a.k.a. Arenza Lenskaya, who's a con artist who infiltrates the nobility to set herself up with a cushy life, only to run afoul of the Rook, a Dread Pirate Roberts-style vigilante, whose mission is to oppose the nobility, including the increasingly popular Alta Renata. And then capers, banter, double crosses, and identity hijinks ensue, and think the Scarlet Pimpernel meets an aged-up Lee Bardugo's Six of Crows and a dash of Scott Lynch's Lies of Locke Lamora.
I would say it lives up to that. So, and by the way, if anyone hasn't seen the original Scarlet Pimpernel or read the stories, they really, really do need to. Also, Scaramouche. Scaramouche is a wonderful story. So what was the inspiration for this particular book? I know you sort of allude to it in the back of the book in your afterword, but what's the down and dirty?
So we have committed the whole, there was a role-playing game thing. Yeah, like straight up, Ren is my PC from a game that Alyc is running. It's something where we were playing along in the game. There was some stuff involving Ren and some NPCs that didn't really involve other characters and other players in the game. So rather than like running it while everybody else just sits around, we said, well, what if we write it as a scene? So we opened up a Google Doc and we wrote this thing collaboratively. And that was fun. So we wrote some more scenes. And then at one point I counted and we had something like 50,000 words of fiction for this game. And we said, maybe we should try writing a novel together. Yeah. At which point we started like brainstorming tropes that we both liked and seeing like, okay, what kind of story would we want to write? And we spent, I don't know, a while kicking this around.
Before we actually, it took an embarrassingly long amount of time before we went, oh, maybe we should write this story that we've already been writing.
I see the question in chat. It's a Pathfinder game, but yeah. So we basically said, let's file the serial numbers off of it.
Yeah, it was basically Marie had run an incredible Legend of the Five Rings game for me and our group of friends, and so for her birthday, she requested that somebody run a game for her because she was like, I want to play in a game rather than run.
I was thinking like a one shot.
I was thinking like a one shot.
Multi-year campaign later.
And yeah, the moment I was like, I'm just going to run it straight out of the box. I'm not going to do any modification. I got like half a page into reading the module and I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to modify this. So yeah. Even the original game is like very modified from what the original module I pulled it from was. And then the book got modified from there because Marie, you can talk about the invertebrate novel.
Yeah, that was my phrase for a while, is that we had invented the invertebrate novel because we had a couple of characters and like their interactions with each other and the arc of how those relationships change. What we didn't have was a spine, so we had to like come up with a plot that would prop up these characters and their relationships in a suitable fashion and make the beats that we wanted to have happen feel like they were, justified and had interesting, things going on around them. So yeah, we kind of ripped the spine out of the game and plugged a different one in to make a new setting, a new plot, and so forth.
That kind of raises two questions for me. One, and feel free to tackle this in any order you want. One is, were you able to, by almost sort of logicking a spine into existence, were you able to still find a story that you were emotional about, that touched you in a way that you felt like it was important to spend the time and energy to actually write it? And then Alyc, this is sort of for you, which is, did you find it difficult to connect to the story if the main character Ren was sort of Marie's main, RP character? What was your in to this? Was it the world building or was it another character?
So I'm going to tackle that one because I think when we were writing the original scenes for the game, one of the things I like to say about myself is I give good NPC as a GM, and I make very interesting and I have a lot of fun running all of the NPCs, and I come up with very kind of personal motivations for them. And this comes out of running a 5-year Changeling LARP where we had 60 or so players regular. And so you kind of got used to creating a lot of characters for a lot of people. And so as much as Ren was Marie's character, Vargo and Gray were they were my NPCs. And so even when we were writing, she would write from Ren's POV, but I would be providing a lot of either Vargo or Gray's reactions, or I would be kind of giving the kind of world events that were happening around them and the other kind of emotional reactions. So I was just as invested in the story and the characters and the character relationships, I think, as she was, and also kind of making an interesting story for Ren to go through and kind of creating an interesting character arc for Marie for the game. That is something that translated into a character arc for Ren for the book.
Yeah.
So we have someone here in the comments who's asking what an NPC and what LARPing is. So
yeah, I just dropped some answers into chat since Alyc was talking. And so, I mean, when I say that, like, the meat that we started with was some characters and their relationships, there's a reason that Ren and Gray and Vargo are the 3 main points of view you get there, though Tess also was fairly significant. And so Alyc was already, like, basically playing those people in the things that we were writing. And this is actually carried over into how we write the collaboration, because the way that we did it, all of the game scenes were from Ren's point of view, basically, because I didn't know what the NPCs were thinking and what their motivations were and so on. But we would go back and forth where I would write Ren's dialogue and actions and such, and Alyc would write Gray or Vargo or, you know, whoever was in the scene. And we traded off a little bit on, like, environmental description. Sometimes would write, like, you know, a short response if it was not anything terribly involved. Lots of coordinating through chat over, like, here's what I'm kind of aiming for. Oh, you know, or sorry, that wasn't really what I meant by that. Let me fix that. And so that's basically how we write the novels as well. You know, one of us will generally take point depending on who the point of view character is. Certain minor characters will get swapped off depending. Like, if Denia is in a scene where Ren is the point of view, then Alyc is probably writing Denia. But if it's like Gray is interacting with her, then I'm probably writing Denia. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not a small book. I mean, I was Marie, I've read A Natural History of Dragons and thoroughly enjoyed it. But this is the first bit of writing from you, Alyc, that I've read. And I saw the book and I thought, well, that's not too bad. I'm just going to blow right through this. And I did blow through it, actually. But I got about this far in, and I was like, I write big books, and this is a big book.
It got thicker in the finished copy because it's nicer paper.
I had the opposite. My book was thicker in the ARC and then thinner in the hardcover. So that's kind of cool.
I have to share the story because we both were reading it, and last week Marie asked me, she's like, so how far are you in? I'm like, oh, you know, I may be like halfway. And she's like, well, where are you?
We're both reading it in ebook here.
Ebook, yeah. And I'm like, I may be halfway. And she's like, where are you? And I'm like, this thing just happened. And she's like, you're like 10
a quarter,
or 15,
maybe
4% in. And I was like,
let me put it this way. Kira was still on the extenuating circumstances. I'm like, you are not halfway through the book.
Yeah. Well, I did debate making that whole section a book of its own. So you're not there was a point wrong.
Partway through it where I was like, yeah, I mean, it is totally the kind of story where you could have divided it up into multiple volumes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think as the series goes along with this one, people will see why we divided this series up the way that we did. Because again, I mean, theoretically, it could have been a longer series of smaller books. But there's a certain unity to each one that is important to us structurally. So,
yeah.
That was actually one of the questions I had for you. No, after you.
I was going to say, yeah, somebody actually asked a Goodreads question today, and I've seen this question float up a couple of times, which is, does it end on a cliffhanger or is it a standalone book? And my kind of response, and I think this has come out in a couple of the reviews that have gone out, is that the book is its own story, but it does end with seeds that lead you on to the next story in the sort of like, you know, what's going to happen next. But there's no cliffhangers. It is good. Yeah, there are hook questions for the next story, but the story in and of itself is we answer all the questions that we ask at the beginning of the book.
I'd agree with that, and I'd say that it did catch me by surprise. There are two things. So I have finished and enjoyed The Mask of Mirrors. I should have said that right at the beginning. I think the characters are great and the world building is spectacular. There are two things you did that caught me by surprise. I mean, lots of small things, but two big things. One was, for some reason, I didn't know that it was the first part of a series. So, and you're absolutely right. It is definitely self-contained. It tells the story it's telling. But then I got to that and I was like, oh, I need more. I want answers for X, Y, Z. Where's the next book? But I don't want to spoil this for readers who haven't gotten through the book. But there's something you do. This is a very big plot picture. There's one character who arrives at a certain fate, and I did not see it coming. You guys did something I didn't expect. And the reason I didn't expect it, I'm sure you know the answer to this, but the reason I didn't expect it to is because it felt like you consciously subverted a very expected trope or archetype of where the story was going, and you stepped sideways instead of into the trope. Mm-hmm. And I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's almost like I need book 2 to really decide how I feel about it. And I got to hand it to you. I thought that was a very brave choice. I think you handled it well, but it did catch me by surprise.
I mean, we're both, in addition to, like, we met at this archaeological field school, but we both also studied folklore. And so we simultaneously love a good trope and also love going, okay, now what can we do to play with this?
We love a well-executed trope, including the execution part where you kill it.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, that answers that question. So let's talk about the world building a little bit. I mean, I think the world you've created for The Mask of Mirrors and just in general is so rich. And I mean, it shows from everything from the place names and the people names. There's a sense of history there. And of course, I'd love to talk about the magic system because that's a particular favorite of mine. I mean, the costumes, that's actually a big plot point. You found a good plot reason for talking about costumes.
Yeah, because I mean, clothing matters in an aristocratic society. Like, it's not just some decorative thing. Clothing is politics. Clothing is social power. Like, you know, when Ren is coming into this pretending to be noble but not actually having the built-up history of connections, then clothing is a way that she can get people's attention and make herself desirable, socially speaking. So, yeah, like, it's something we really wanted to lean into. All of the descriptions are Alyssa's. I can take credit for changing the color of one outfit, and that's it.
I might have a pile of fabric sitting right there because I'm going to be running a poll on which outfit I should make first this weekend. Because I'm going to be making some of the costumes from the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Alyssa, do you have a favorite fabric or favorite type of outfit?
I love the kind of frock coat Gestacore look. Like, I love the coat with the wide swirling skirts and the you know that swirl around the boots that come up to the knee. Like, it's a shape I love. There's
a reason we put the Leganti men in that type of coat.
There's a reason that both the Rook and the Leganti men are in that outfit. And actually, there's a reason the Rook is in that outfit, and then the Leganti men are in that outfit because the Rook is in that outfit, because we didn't want it to look like our grandfather was running around the rooftops, because the Rook has been around for 200-ish years, and the Leganti, you know, fashion travels in cycles. So we kind of did that deliberately.
Oh yeah.
So how did the both of you world build this novel? I know some of it obviously is coming from the gaming, and you both have. You know,
the world actually very little is from the game.
Yeah. We kind of deliberately moved away from the game because we didn't want it to resemble anything about the world that the game had been set in. We wanted it to be our own world and kind of build the plot from that.
Yeah. In terms of, you know, the world building being extensive, I probably shouldn't call the trilogy When Anthropologists Attack in public, because that is going to appeal to a very specific subset of people, which is maybe not everyone. But yeah, I mean, the anthropological background, we spent an extensive period of time working out some of the details of the world before we started writing, which honestly is true of a lot of the aspects of working on this. We can't do the thing that either of us does on our own of kind of winging a lot of stuff as we go along, because We don't share the same skull, and therefore that nebulous cloud in the skull of, here's the evolving story-shaped thing. Yeah, no, we've got to be much more explicit about everything, whether it's the world building or the outlining of the plot or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, it's funny because as much as we really sat down and planned, plot, world, we had charts, Marie has spreadsheets, color-coded spreadsheets. I feel like there was an organic aspect to it because with the whole, with the clothing being so important, with the moment that Marie came up with the name for the pattern deck, because we knew there was going to be this divinatory deck, but then when we decided on pattern as the name, all of these textile metaphors started to emerge and just go through the entire book, and especially for Fresenian culture. And
they are textile metaphors ahoy.
Textile metaphors ahoy. And so, the fashion is one kind of explicit, not metaphorical use of textiles, but then even things like multiple POV, which again, I think is something that some people really love and some people are less enthused by. The way that we use multiple points of view has that same textile quality of these densely woven interlocking stories and agendas and narratives and identities, kind of everything so strongly dependent on each other that if you pull one thread, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, our editor commented in revising book 2 that this isn't the kind of story where it can be like, oh, well, we need to tighten up the pacing, so cut that scene. Because that scene connects to like 9 other things, and if you pull it out, you got to find some way to take those threads and reconnect them somewhere else, or you wind up with a gaping hole in the fabric.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you do cut a scene, maybe you could get away with it, but you end up losing some vital understanding of the character and, who they are, and I totally understand that. So were there any like specific cultural inspirations you were looking to with the world building that sort of got you off in the right direction, or was it sort of a whole cloth, to use a textual metaphor?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, for any anthropologists in the audience, I think of it as bricolage, of kind of taking the, bits and pieces of things and kind of MacGyvering them together into something. The names, obviously, Fresenian names look kind of Slavic, the Leganti names are kind of Italianate, but they're not Italian and Slavic cultures. So you get things like the religious thing of the faces and the masks, or the duality of the gods, actually was just born out of me being annoyed at how D&D handles evil gods. I'm like, you don't worship evil gods in the sense of, yay, evil! You propitiate them so that they won't do bad things to you. So the faces and the masks, the benevolent and the malevolent half of like the same deity, that is where that came from. The idea that in Fresenian theology, like the soul has multiple parts, I got that from Egypt, because there's the multi-part Egyptian soul. Their food is more based on Chinese food, because the Dejera is like a really broad river valley that's very good for rice cultivation. So I'm like, okay, if it's a rice-based cuisine in roughly this zone of climate, then let's look at China.
And again, with a lot of fish and river birds and fish, freshwater fish kind of things. But then also with Leganti, you've got these imports that are coming in. So you've got kind of competing foodways that are class and ethnicity based.
We had to invent everything twice. We had to come up with the Leganti version and the Fresenian version of,
and then figure out the Nadezhran version, because this is a place that is kind of mixing for a couple centuries. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that perhaps when an anthropologist's attack is a fairly narrow subset of fiction, but I disagree. I think that any reader who enjoys well-constructed worlds and characters and stories are going to appreciate this, because personally, I think the effort definitely shows, without a doubt. I mean, the work shows, and there's a solidity to it that is, I was going to say it's hard to fake. I actually don't think you can fake it, because if you could fake it, people would. I mean, it's just spending that time in thinking and asking those questions and working it out. And I think it really shows.
I mean, I think there's a certain amount of, the more you know about culture and like anthropological ideas and such, the easier it is to kind of whip up stuff on the fly and have it feel solid, as opposed to needing to put in maybe, months of work ahead of time. So I think that's the closest you come to faking it, is you just come to understand things well enough that you can cobble them together more quickly. Still doesn't mean there's not a lot of work involved.
So, so I wanted to ask about the magic system, or I should say systems.
Yes, we have multiple.
You did double the work again in that regard. So, yeah, how did you come up with them? What's the logic behind them? How do they fit together? That's it's a very mechanistic question, and I apologize for it, but that's how my brain works.
I'll talk about pattern first, since that's one of our major things here. And actually, for people who don't know, if you go looking on our site, macarrick.com, there's a thing for pattern reading where you can draw cards from this deck through a widget. This was something we knew from the start that Ren in the game had been a fortune teller, so we wanted that to continue. But we didn't want it to just be a tarot deck with new names slapped on top. So we thought, okay, we need to come up with our own system. And pretty much the first things that I started off with were, number one, that idea of the faces and the masks. So you get these face cards and mask cards. So the Mask of Mirrors, the title of the book, that is the card of secrets and lies, which is pretty on point for the narrative that we're telling here. And the second thing that I think was my major starting point was having it be sort of a tripartite thing. There are three suits that get referred to as threads because textile metaphors ahoy. And I divided it up. I think originally it was going to be like physical things, kind of mental social things, and spiritual things. Only when I started to try and like work that out into cards, I realized I needed to move the mental stuff off with the spiritual and have social bonds be kind of their own category. And so it gets described as the inner self is your mental and spiritual things. The outer self is your relationships with people and the institutions of society. And then the physical self is all of the concrete stuff about your body or the world around you. And then, yeah, I mean, I sat there for a while just kind of listing concepts that I thought might need cards and which thread they would go into, and then narrowing it down into a list of suitable numbers. And I will say, by the way, every single reading in the book, we had some blank cards, so we wrote the card names out on, and I shuffled them and I laid them. Every single reading is the cards we laid.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and in some cases, there were plots that developed or changed or gathered nuance because of what the card said. And we were like, all right, this is what we've got. What do we do with it?
And in fact, there's one reading fairly late in the book where Ren tries to look at a card and basically gets a migraine. And it's because we laid out that card and went,
that is going to give everything away.
Yeah, like there is the answer right there. We need Ren to not have it. Well, there's magic that would interfere, so yeah, she gets a migraine and can't see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
But Numenatria is Alyssa's baby.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because I think in the kind of tripart pattern of the spun thread, cut thread, woven thread, and the kind of social, spiritual, physical aspects kind of also reflect the three magic systems, because pattern is the kind of social interwoven one.
Yeah.
The Numenatria is the kind of spiritual and mental one, because it's a very logical cerebral system that is also kind of connected to the divine that the Leganti worship, and then imbuing is the, as Marie likes to call it, the redheaded stepchild.
It doesn't get any respect.
It doesn't get respect because it is a magic system that is crafting. It's kind of meditative crafting, where the better you are in making something, the better you can make it in a magical sense. You can actually put your kind of life energy into it, which is something that is very hard, like, to systematize or teach to people. So it doesn't get a lot of respect because there are no schools for imbuing. It's like you go to learn to be a glass blower or a tailor or whatever.
Anybody who's worked on some kind of craft, or like writers, will hit this, where when you get into the flow state, that's basically how imbuing happens. Yeah. When you're in that mode that like you're just not even aware of anything around you and you are on with what you're doing, that's imbuing.
Yeah. And so that's how the kind of the three magic systems relate, is they kind of fill those different niches and those different approaches. But yeah, for me, Numenatria, so since Marie had taken point on pattern, because that was, she'd already done a lot of work on it with regards to the game, I took point on Numenatria. And it's also because it made sense for me to do it, because Vargo, who is one of the main characters, who is an inscriptor, who's the person who does Numenatria, is kind of in my stable. It made sense for me to have the closest relationship to it. And so I based it on real world concepts around sacred geometry and numerology. And I think it was like a Thursday, that Marie gave me this. She loaned me this book, and I say loan, but I haven't given it back to her. It's like been 3 years.
I'm never getting the book back.
I'm gonna get my own copy, I swear.
But slight background here, I was like, oh, if we're gonna do a sacred geometry thing, there's this book that I read years ago, which might, I remember it being really cool, so here, let me loan it to you. And Alyc goes home with it, and I have this moment of, I read that in high school? God, I hope it's actually a good book and I'm not going to be like embarrassed that I suggested it or something.
So at the end of the weekend, I have this like 6 or 7 page document.
Literally, Alyc emails me a multi-page document being like, boom, Numenatria. I'm like, oh, well, I guess the book was helpful.
And I actually got very interested in reteaching myself certain elements of geometry and ways to kind of create the figures using only a compass, a chalk, and edge to be able to create all these geometric figures, because that's what inscriptors traditionally do, although they've got tools that they cheat with. But I was like, well, I need to be able to know how this works and know how to do this and know what problems might come up and what challenges. And so even in doing that, a lot of the Numenatria got refined, because I was like, okay, well, Septagons are hard. They're impossible to make a perfect Septicon. And so the whole idea about Septagons being this kind of idea of perfection and imperfection, because you can't make, like just mathematically, you cannot make a perfect Septagon. And so things like that were fun.
That kind of reminds me, in Into Sleep, I have this group of people called Numenists who were, and so their definition of God, or one of their definitions of God, is that it's the greater part of 2 equal halves.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why, but it makes sense to me.
If you see, like in the 3rd book, some passing reference to like Sateran philosophers who argue about that, it's going to be a nod to you.
It's going to be a nod to you. Yeah. There's already a moment. I sent a quote to Marie over the weekend where basically it's when the entropists, when Kira first meets the entropists, and they're like, one of them's like, yeah, there's this guy, Pontifex Digitalis, and the other one's like, isn't that Latin terrible? And
yeah, shockingly bad Latin.
We have almost that exact conversation in book 2.
Yeah, there's a group that has a sort of quasi-Latin name in book 2, and somebody's like, yeah, it's terrible.
It's terrible Latin.
Because we use Latin for Sateran.
Fortunately, I can thank my sister for that one. She caught my terrible Latin and made fun of me for it. And so I said, well, I'm a big enough person to put it in the book.
I wondered if that was how that came about. It just had that feeling of, I made up this name, and somebody said, that's not how that works, and you said, I'm going with it.
That's right. Because that's how people work. That's how people work.
Yeah.
I think it also comes for us because Marie is definitely the Latin geek among us, and so I'll throw out a term. She's also just the language. She's a lot more fussy about like names and language.
Fussy is the right word.
Fussy is the right word. You're a Virgo.
It took a long. Yeah, I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Virgo. It took a long time for us to come up with Versenian, because I was like, I need a word that I like enough for that ethnic group, and God, it took forever to hit on Versenian.
Well, I'm lucky. I have a grandmother who's a former dean of arts and sciences, and she her specialty was Dante, and so she knows her Latin, and I was able to throw stuff at her, and then she was able to point out every single problem with it, which was wonderful. Yeah. But so going back to the magic for a second, with the different systems that you have, do you privately have like an overarching sense or theory of how it all actually fits together behind the scenes? Or because that seems like the sort of thing you would do, or do they just all sort of coexist and it's not going to be explained how they coexist in the world? So
some of it is going to be explained, because there's a character who you do see her in The Mask of Mirrors. She plays a larger role in the 2nd book, Toniquus Fionola. She basically wants to answer that question. There's a line in the 1st book, I think it survived the various edits, about how Toniquus basically wants to take the universe apart like a clock to figure out how it goes. Yeah. So she is very interested in asking those questions, and we do actually have some answers to them, though how much of it will come out in this series, we'll see.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to write The Mask of Mirrors, and when can we expect book 2?
4 months is the answer to the first part. It's a 200,000 word book, and we wrote it in 4 months.
Can I have your brains?
I mean, it was something
both because it's very much a synergy thing.
Yeah, it was a gestalt, and it was the fact that, you know, if you've got a good collaboration, then we kept each other's energy up. Like we did NaNoWriMo for 4 months straight is what it amounts to, but it's because when one of us would get stuck of like, I don't really know how to make that go, the other one would say, well, what if we did this? And it made it a lot easier to get past those slow bits. And I mean, it's certainly not half the work when you're sharing it with somebody else. Like there's lots of extra work that goes into collaborating, but we regularly were doing like 2,500 words a day, and it didn't even feel hard. Yeah. Whereas normally for me, I do like about 1,000 words a day. Like that's my normal pace. So
it was 2,500 words in, I'm going to do 100-word chunk, and then Marie, go. And
yeah, it's like, I have no idea how to do this next bit. It's your turn. Tag.
and also a lot of it is, there's a certain joy in and bringing your A game in to, I'm going to write this bit and I know Marie's going to love it. You know, I know she's going to love this line. I know she's going to love this little twist that I put in. And similarly, getting something from her and being like, oh my God, that's amazing. And it inspires me to come up with great stuff to give back.
And the instant feedback of either in chat or we're constantly leaving marginal notes for each other in the Google Doc. I think my favorite, I've made a little promotional graphic with this, which I'll be probably posting in the next week. I had put something into the text, and then Alyce put in a comment that was exactly what I was thinking, which is, to be honest, Renata said, and then proceeded to lie. The epitaph on Red's tombstone. And I'm like, yes. Yeah. So we also kind of constantly get like that instant audience of somebody being like, oh, that line was great or whatever.
Yeah. And it also helps. There was one particular scene. This is book 2, but there was one particular scene where we knew we needed to have something really awful that was said, and we wrote that scene 4 or 5 times. And every time we wrote it, we were like, "This isn't awful enough. This isn't awful enough.
We got to get that knife in there. Come on."
And when we finally got it, I think. I don't even remember which one of us it was at this point, but we were like, we wrote the thing and we both went, ooh. And we're like, that's the scene. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, you know, you're making me want, you're making me wish I had someone to collaborate with like this. I mean, my sister and I have collaborated, but we've never done anything on a novel like this. And it sounds like you both had a wonderful experience with this.
Yeah. I mean, it takes the right person, and it helps that at this point we've literally known each other for more than 20 years because we met in the summer of 2000. And we've been basically good writing buddies since then because we think similarly enough that, like, when I get stuck on a book, Alyce is the person that I go to, and I'm like, can you read the partial draft and then help me figure out what the hell I'm doing here? Because there are plenty of people whose writing I love and admire, and their brains come from alien planets, and I don't know how they work. But Alyce will ask the right kinds of questions or make the right kinds of suggestions for me to go, okay, well, no, maybe not that, but what if this? And, you know, it'll go rolling. And
I think that same experience means that neither of us have a lot of ego around critique or saying, that's not working, but what about this? And really kind of pushing back on things that don't quite feel right until we get to the thing where we're like, yes, that is
either where it's because, no, that doesn't seem right to me, or cases where we're like, it could work, but it's not making me light up. So let's try to get to that.
And it saves time instead of like finishing a whole draft and then saying it doesn't work. And having to rewrite 100,000 words.
Alyce made us change a pivotal point in book 2 twice because, like, we were all set to do a thing, and then Alyce was like, no, we need to scrap this plan and do this other thing. And then we were all set to do that, and then Alyce was like, no, actually, I think we need to change it again. And I'm sitting there going, on the one hand, I hope I'm allowed to swear here, fuck you, and on the other hand, God damn it, you're right.
Wait, that is the perfect description of editing right there.
Yes. Yeah, we're kind of being editors for each other as well as collaborators,
So when can we expect book 2? And do we have a title?
We do not have a title yet. It is currently slated for November. We don't have a specific date yet. That may shift slightly, but that is the current plan.
Yeah, we basically we wrote that one in 4 months as well.
That one got divided up because there was a chunk of it that we wrote first. But anyway,
there's a chunk we wrote first, and then we finished it. But but a little bit over 4 months maybe. And then we just finished revisions and turned it into our editor yesterday. So hopefully she likes it.
Is it longer or shorter than book one?
It's a little bit shorter because actually we were in fact pushed pretty hard to cut down the first book as much as we could. At one point it had ballooned up to 226,000 words.
226, yeah.
Yeah, and it got down to about, I think, 213, so we managed to hack a decent chunk out of it. I mean, it's obviously still a chonker of a book, but it's no longer, oh lord, it coming.
I had the weirdest experience with editing to sleep where normally I drop about 10% in a manuscript size when in editing, and I think I maybe did during the editing of that book, but because of comments from my editors, I ended up adding 30,000 words in total length over the course of editing it, which was a really weird experience, quite honestly.
Yeah.
But that's a separate topic.
We can nerd out about the technical side later.
That's right. We could keep talking about so many things here. I would love to get to some questions from our audience here, and maybe that'll lead us to some of those topics in any case. Marie, I believe you do have a reading for us if you're up for performing in public. But before you do, one last question for the two of you. What do you ultimately hope that readers are going to take from The Mask of Mirrors, whether it's a theme or an emotion, a feeling, a thought, an idea, anything in particular? What is it you were trying to say and that you hope people take away from it?
So I'd say there's kind of two things, and one of them is more a thing from the series rather than this book, because the thing that I'm going to say doesn't really quite show itself fully until later books. In the short term, I hope they love our characters, because that is where this started for us. I hope you get invested in them, that you hurt when they hurt and are happy when they're happy, and that you have an investment in what's going to happen to them. The longer term thing is, we've talked to each other about seeing this series as being basically anti-grimdark, not in the sense of it is the opposite of grimdark, everything is happy, but that the arc of it is against grimdark. It is not a story about how you will, scrape together the bloody remnants of victory out of the ashes of everything you once loved. Instead, it is a story about how people who are horribly dishonest and mistrustful and psychologically scarred and, unable to tell a straight truth, will over time learn to heal and learn to trust the right people and come together to change things. That's the overall arc that you'll only see a little bit of in this book because things start out dark and get better over time.
We build towards that. You have to start from the place of no trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that answer because, I think life is hard for everyone in one way or another, even if everything is perfect in on the surface. We all have to deal with questions of existential existence, and life presents certain sorrows to all of us at one point or another. And I think trying to make the world a better place is the best thing any of us can do. So I love that answer. All right, so perform for us.
Yes.
Dance. Now you must dance and perform, author.
Dance. I'm going to read a very brief bit. I'm going to try to keep this to about 5 minutes. So just a brief lead into this is that Ren, as Renata, is going slumming in her old slum neighborhood with a bunch of other nobles. And they have suddenly gotten interrupted by the appearance of the Rook, our hooded vigilante. And I'm going to be picking up in the middle of that. And as a brief context, Ren pretending to be from Ceteris, that is the British accent. Her thoughts sounding more Slavic is the fact that she is actually Versenian. I will do my best at the switching between accents. This is public reading on hard mode. Before she could think the better of it, Renata stepped forward. Her shoe came down on the blade of Metzen's sword, just as the Rook crouched to pick it up. As I understand it, Alton Metzen gave that actor a chance to defend himself in an honorable duel, she said. Surely you can do no less. The Rook straightened slowly. Even close enough to touch, she could make out almost nothing through the darkness of his hood. The deeper shadows of his eyes, the line of his jaw, like the stars, she saw more when she didn't look directly. Then a glimmer of a smile came into view. Though she couldn't see his eyes, she felt him assessing her, as surely as she was assessing him. The Rook said, I could do less, or a good deal more. Their audience was growing as people crowded to watch the scene, but his murmur was for her alone. Then it lifted up with mockery for everyone to hear. But if I'm to play at noble games, shouldn't I get a noble's reward for my trouble? She bent to pick up the sword, letting it dangle from her gloved fingers. What sort of reward could a man like you want? It took every ounce of deceit she possessed to make the question sound dismissive. What mask have I offended, meeting the Rook as a noblewoman? A man like me wants for little. The hood dipped to the sword in her hand, then rose once more. But as there's such a treasure, I'll take the Alta's gloves. Her fingers tightened on the sword's hilt as the onlookers gasped. Most of those watching were common Nadejrans who cared little for Leganti ways. A few of them laughed. The nobles didn't. People of quality were not properly dressed in public without their gloves. By their lights, the Rook might as well have demanded she strip. A fair duel, Renata said, wrapping her hand carefully around the blade so she could offer the sword hilt first. And if you win, then a single glove. Her tone implied doubt. Inwardly she prayed, I hope you're as good as the stories say. Agreed. The Rook took the hilt, sliding the flat of the blade along her palm like he meant to cut his prize away early. I trust you'll remind me of the rules if I stray. You nobles make simple things so complicated. Flipping the blade, he tossed it to Metzen and drew his own. Metzen caught it, his previous swagger returning. I'm more than able to school muck-fucking scum like you. Don't worry, Alta Renata. I'll hand you his hood when I cut it off. The Rook murmured, she can make gloves out of it. Uniat. His blade swept down and up to a high stance as he spoke the opening challenge. Metzen's grin slipped. The Rook might claim ignorance of noble rules, but he knew the proper terms and forms for dueling. Tuat, Metzen spat in answer to the Rook's challenge, and barely finished cutting his own salute before he attacked. Within 2 heartbeats, Ren knew she hadn't gambled foolishly. The Rook dropped immediately from the straight-armed Leganti stance into the lower Versenian one, and met Metzen's charge without flinching, parrying the nobleman's thrusts with a few quick angles of his wrist. And he respected the rules of the game, passing up an opportunity to stomp on the arch of Metzen's foot, the way Ren would have done in his place. But she was a former river rat, and he was the Rook. He could be brutal when necessary, witness Eliadis's broken wrist, but it was his flair that won him the hearts of the common folk. He danced out of the path of Metzen's thrusts with a little lace step, and when Metzen made the mistake of rushing him, the Rook stepped in to meet it, locking them body to body in a brief circling waltz. Only a swift tilt of his head prevented Metzen's spit from flying into his hood, and he let go just in time to avoid an elbow to the jaw. The hood turned toward Ren. Remind me, Alta, are elbows permitted? They are not, she said, suppressing a laugh. I thought not. The tip of his blade rapped Metzen's arm hard, right where the nerve ran between skin and bone. Mind your manners, boy. The blow and the words were both calculated to enrage, but the increasing wildness of Metzen's attacks only left him vulnerable. Almost too fast for Ren to follow, the tip of the Rook's sword snaked through the looping guard of Metzen's rapier and wrenched it from his hand. Metal grated as the hilt slid down the Rook's blade. He twirled the trapped weapon in a full circle, like a child with a toy, then tilted his hand so Metzen's sword flew clear. It flashed through the open air and sank without a trace in the waters of the canal. I believe that's Ninot, the Rook said to Metzen, who was gaping after his blade. Do you submit? I do not! But I thought being disarmed was a clear loss under the rules. The Rook stepped back, placing himself by the wall of the bridge. Alta, you're the closest we have to an arbiter. Will you call Ninot? She pulled herself back into character, relaxing from the impassive posture she'd held during the duel. Assuming the rules are like those of Sotaris, then yes, to be disarmed is to be defeated. Ninot. Metzen took a step toward the Rook, hands curled into fists. That rapier was imbued by the swordsmith Vicadrius herself. There isn't another like it in Nadejra. The Rook sheathed his blade. Then by all means, go after it. Renata saw the move coming. So did the Rook. She suspected he'd invited it. When Metzen charged, the Rook faded out of the way and applied boot to ass. The kick provided the extra momentum needed to send Metzen flying over the rail and into the canal. Though I believe it landed on the other side of the bridge. You might want to check there, the Rook called down over the laughter and cheers from the onlookers. He hopped onto the rail and bowed. Then he turned to Renata. Now we see whether you, like our local nobility, will break the rules when it suits you. I believe you owe me a glove. I have fun reading that scene. Usually I do a longer thing that gives you the lead-in and the fallout of the glove, but...
That sounds like an epic poem from the 1800s, The Fallout of the Glove.
That does.
Or the Victorian era, I should say.
I feel like this is a poem somebody in Nadezhda wrote, like a broadside ballad that was mocking medicine.
Lovely. I have to say that was one of my favorite scenes in the book also. And by the way, before we go to Q&A, can I just comment on what a gorgeous cover you guys got? I hope you like it.
We got Lauren Panatino. I'm blanking on her last name all of a sudden.
Panapinto.
Panapinto. Thank you.
Yeah.
We had been discussing like ways to go with the cover, and then she suggested this artist Necro who does just glorious work and sent us some like samples, and we were like, yes, we want them to do our cover. So yeah.
So I'm going to read some questions for you, both of you.
Sure.
And if anyone wants to leave a question down at the bottom, you'll see a tab that says, or a link that says ask a question. That's where you should type your questions. So the first question is from Amiko, and Amiko is asking, will the audiobook be available through the US Audible store at some point?
Yes, it should be available. Something has gone wrong. We're not sure what, but there is an audiobook. It should be out literally today. It's not, so any day now it'll be available.
And my understanding is that it's available through other places, but
yes.
If you're going through Audible, it's just Audible that doesn't have it.
Audible has had a problem. Yeah.
Who's reading the audiobook, by the way?
Nikki Masood.
Thank you. I was like, Nikki, what's her last name? It's my turn.
I was like,
to forget.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name properly, but she just did an amazing. We listened to a couple different potential audiobook narrators, and they were all great, but hers in particular, there's so many accents that you need to do.
Yeah, because you've got to be able to do like
the same
RP.
person.
Yeah, the RP, the Slavic, Tess is Irish. Like, got a lot of things there.
Yeah, and she just like did an amazing. Voices for all of them, and she does good sexy male voices, which is important.
Kind of necessary. Yeah.
And that's tough, going both ways, finding male readers who can do female voices and vice versa. That was actually one of the big challenges with To Sleep, was that because I have a lot of male characters surrounding my female main character at times, and it was like getting someone who could do those and have the strength they needed was important. Okay, so we have a question from, I'm not sure who this is. It says Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore.
Who are they?
Who are they?
It's mystery.
And they are asking, what scene or section brought each one of you the most joy to write?
I mean, I got to admit, I love the larger scene that selection comes from, because it's the first time the Rook appears. It's where we really get like the noble dynamics and the swashbuckling, and Ren being really, really manipulative.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean,
there's just so many scenes that I like. I tend to love any place where there is banter happening over dueling or dancing, and we have a lot of those because we have several, like, either Renata is learning to dance, or she is at a ball and she's dancing, and there are those wonderful tense bantery conversations that are happening when the choreography and the movement. I love banter and movement, and so all of those were a joy to write.
But because we're horrible people, some of our favorite scenes are where terrible things are happening to the characters.
Yeah, I will say, I saw in chat, Emiko mentioned that drool-worthy descriptions of Vargo. And yeah, pretty much any time we're describing Vargo being a charming asshole is also really fun to write.
Oh, that's funny. And as a guy, Vargo was a lot of fun to read too. So works both ways. Now, here's a question from Kirsten, who says, "How does your archaeology background inform your writing and world building?" Parentheses. Also, a natural history of dragons partially inspired me to be a naturalist in real hecking life. So thank you so much for writing it. Double exclamation points.
First of all, awesome! I am so glad.
And then nobody decided to become a con artist.
Yeah, yes. Do not take this book as your model for like anything. The archaeology, I think really where it shows up is the things like the clothing and so forth, where archaeology is about studying human culture through the technical term is material culture. It's all the physical stuff and the ways that we change the world around us. That's what archaeology sees. And so I think it means that we pay a lot of attention to the physical environment. What do people eat because of the physical environment and the climate? You know, what are the houses like? What do they wear? What kinds of physical objects do they make? That's where I think the archaeology really comes through for both of us.
Yeah. I think also, in some ways, because I know I think I might have focused on this a little bit more than you, but I did social context archaeology, which looks at how the past is interpreted and meaning is made of it in the present. And I think what you had said earlier about there's a history, but things have changed over time and meanings of things have changed over time, I think is something that we're very aware of and try to work with and play with as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about too, because I think we're often unaware of the own soup we swim in, so to speak. You know, if you haven't made an effort to examine your own belief systems and sort of the cultural framework that leads you to behave in certain ways, and it can be, I think it can be really uncomfortable for people to examine that stuff if you're accepting it unconsciously most of your life, and then to suddenly say, hey, wait a minute, you know, this actually isn't the way humans have to live. It's the way I've been conditioned to live. And what does that mean for my own choices?
Anthropology is really good for basically estranging you from your own culture in that way that you sort of learn to look at it and go, wow, like that thing that we take for granted is frankly kind of arbitrary. Like, why do we do it that way? That's just because how we do it. Actually, looks like Christopher may have frozen. Yeah.
Growing up homeschooled,
there he is.
Montana will do that also.
Yeah.
I was just saying, growing up in homeschooled in Montana will do that for you all.
Yeah. You're coming from a very different cultural perspective than a lot of other people.
Indeed. Let's see. We seem to have a little bit of lag here. So we're going to ask another question here from another Chris.
Whoops. Oh. All right.
He warned us that this might happen because
okay, I'll go ahead and answer the did you create a soundtrack for this book while writing it? Let's see.
I can and pretend I have a beard.
Give me just 1 second to grab a link. Let's see. Because yes, there is a soundtrack, and I will link you to it. The track titles are they verge on spoilery. I tried to name them in a way that won't. I don't know if everybody's hearing the echo that I'm hearing. Sorry.
Sorry, I had to jump on so quick I didn't get to.
Okay. You get to hear two of me. I am doubled. I am the face and the mask of myself or something. I don't know. There we go. That's better. So yes, I have tossed into the chat window a link to the soundtrack. That's a track listing that tells you what songs I picked. And then there's also a link there to Spotify, which has as many of the tracks as were available there, so you can actually hear the music.
Yay! Oh, I love a good soundtrack. And this is my personal question that I'm going to be selfish and throw in for you guys. Since clothing plays such an important part in things, it's kind of a two-folded question. Based off of how you like to dress, what station would you have been put into in this world? And then, which station would you want to have been put in?
I mean, in daily life, I slump around in, whatever pair of comfy pants I got. Like before the pandemic, because I write full time, so it's comfy pants and a t-shirt or long sleeve shirt depending on the season. So I'm not super fancy normally. I think if I could, I do like Leganti men's clothing, also Versenian men's clothing, honestly, because they basically have Tibetan panel coats and those are gorgeous. If there's none of it I would turn my nose up at. I would happily wear any of it.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I think I would probably be a kind of a Versenian laborer in terms of what I usually wear, because it's just like the loosest, most comfortable pants and the loosest, most comfortable shirt you can find. I would not wear the panel coat because I run warm, and so I would just always be like overheated. But no, if I had my absolute druthers, and like I was saying, I've got like fabric that I'm working with that I don't know if you can see it, but There's like a bunch of fabric over here. I would definitely, the Leganti men's fashion, the waistcoats and the frock coats, Justicore, are totally where I'm at.
Women's clothing doesn't even stand a chance. We're all going to go with awesome men's clothing.
I mean, it's because I don't really wear skirts, like hardly ever. Alyc wears a lot more skirts than I do.
Well, and I will say there's actually the Versenian women have basically a kind of a high-waisted, it's based on a kind of a Victorianish style belt because it's got a high-waisted belt and then it's got 2 front panels and 2 back panels, and it's sort of like a version of the panel coat. And if people go to the website, there's a blog post where I do.
We linked it in chat earlier, yeah.
Okay, I do very mediocre illustrations of the fashion, but it's and you can wear that over a skirt or over pants, and then the kind of knee-high boots. And I think that would be that's a very attractive silhouette on all figures. Yeah.
It reminds me kind of like, I don't know if it was Victorian, both of you. I should not try and pull things from history because both of you, I feel like, would know way better than I. But I don't know if it was like the Victorian riding skirts, but where it would be like a full skirt, but then you'd still have pants underneath it sometimes, and you could see them from the front a little bit.
And that's actually, you get that with Leganti women where they do this surcoat thing that's kind of like a bandeau bodice and then just a front panel and a back panel that aren't joined at the sides, and that can be worn over an underdress or it can be worn over trousers. So it has a bit of that look to it.
Yeah.
Just the fashion happiness from hearing you guys talk about these items. Okay, this one is what books. Let's do this. Top 10 is a lot, but how about this? From this past year, what were your top 3 reads?
Oh God, from this past year, that would require me to pull up the list of what I've read because right now I am completely blanking. So instead, I'm just going to name a book that I really like. I frequently recommend to people Dorothy Dunnett's Lyman Chronicles series. They are historical fiction set in 16th century Europe, and Dunnett is the only writer who makes me feel abjectly inferior about my own work because she's just that good. You want to see like complex politics and like an author who will just dig in under your ribcage, rip that heart right out, and leave you going, yes, please, may I have another at the end of it. Like, her stuff is amazing.
Who?
Yeah. Dorothy Dunnett.
I have one of her books on your recommendation. The first one, it was at the Game of Kings or something like that?
Yes, Game of Kings. Yes. And there's definitely, you got to learn how to read Dunnett because her writing is very dense and she will often describe around a key thing without telling you that key thing. So you have to sort of pay attention and notice that she didn't tell you, oh, that person's bleeding out and that's why he just collapsed. Like, so got to stay awake. But oh my God, once you get the hang of it, her writing is amazing. And single best fight scene I've ever read in my entire life is in Game of Kings. The duel at Hexham, man. Or at Flaw Valley, sorry, not at Hexham. Blah.
Well, I will definitely have to make a push and get through it then. It's been in my to-read pile since our conversation at Denver Comic-Con, I believe.
I can believe that because I recommend it a lot. So,
and my new obsession this entire year has been translated web novels by a Chinese web novelist, Mo Shang-Tong Xu, who, if people are familiar with The Untamed, which is the kind of live action version of one of her books, The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, is the most popular one. But then the one that I particularly love and just started doing a reread on is Jiangguan Zifu, which is Heaven Official's Blessing. And there's a Donghua, which is an anime out of that. And they just announced a live action version. And so I'm so excited that hopefully more people are going to be reading her stuff and are going to be, watching the various adaptations. And I really, really hope that she gets popular enough that we could get official English language translations because, I've sent money and bought the Chinese versions on the site that hosts them, but it would be really great if more people could get to read her officially, and then she could get money for it. So yeah.
I just looked at the anime and pinned it so I can go and watch it because you said the word anime.
So did you already answer the question about?
We did the one about the top books. That one has been.
Yeah. Did you already get to this? Yes. So we have a question here from AJ who says, "Will Vargo's spider have greater
Master Peabody will continue to show up?" Books? Yes. I don't think we can say much more without spoilers, but yes. I mean, really, the whole thing with Master Peabody was, peacock spiders sort of went around the internet. We're like, oh my god, they look so amazing, and we wrote one into the book and then went, oh, it turns out they're actually like 2 millimeters long in real life. So he's just like a really giant version of one of them.
There's a species in the book that invented a peacock spider so that he could be larger than like the size of a grain of rice.
Because we had already decided that, we wanted to have this, and when we realized how small they were, we're like, we're not letting go of it. Actually, I will say Master Peabody was in the game too. Came along for the ride.
Yes.
You can't have Vargo without his spider.
Vargo and Master Peabody have always been together.
And then I am going to have to cut back in because...
Well, he's a great character, or side character, I should say.
Sorry, what was that, Constance?
It is, I have to be the villain and cut in because we are unfortunately over an hour, even though I feel like we have not been talking that long or listening to you guys for that long, because it's a true pleasure getting to hear all of you speak. It has genuinely felt like sitting down with friends who just have a love of all things awesome tonight. So I want to thank all of you for such an amazing event and sharing such amazing happy things. I love that this book brings happiness to the world. I love a good dark book of death and slash and misery, but it is so nice to have witty banter and happiness as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you
for giving us this book this year. And thank you. Oh, Peacock Spider. Everyone is going to be Googling that now.
Yes.
they are so adorable. Their little dances. They play their own music when they dance.
Have an official mascot for the merchandise for this new universe you have created, Mr. Peabody.
I will say, we want to make all the things. Like, we would love to run a crowdfunding thing to make the pattern deck, or to make like Numinatrian medallions, or the clothing or whatever. We want all the things from our own damn book.
That's where the archaeology product. That's where the archaeology comes out. We want all the material culture.
Yeah.
And
we want to hold it.
The plan is to kickstart or somehow crowdfund a pattern deck.
Yeah, hopefully.
You have heard it, everyone. Make sure that you keep your ears and eyes open for that, because I want a spider pin.
Yeah, everybody needs a lapel pin of Mr. Peabody.
Exactly. And oh my gosh, I'm making this.
We're not. It's not capitalism. It's material. It's archaeology.
It's archaeology, right?
Yeah. All right.
It's very important.
Well, thank you both of you for writing this lovely book and for this wonderful conversation and the lovely reading and all of the interesting topics we've covered. I seriously think we could go another 2 hours and barely cover everything we could cover. So we should do this again with book 2. Thank you, everyone who's been here attending and watching and asking lovely questions. You guys are what make it possible. So again, huge thank you to all of you who read our books and their books and everyone's books. We couldn't do it without you.
And thank you to Mysterious Galaxy for setting all of this up.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. And thank you, Christopher, for having great questions.
Yeah.
My pleasure, seriously.
Thank you, Alyc. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, all the amazing readers. Oh my gosh. I don't want to say goodbye, but we must say goodbye. Thank you for such a phenomenal
If you don't stop us, we're going to keep going.
What? You don't stop me. I'm apparently going to keep going as well.
Our editor has learned that to her everlasting sadness.
But with smiles and laughs, we will say thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time. Go out and buy this phenomenal book. Get your signed copy.
You got your button right there.
Eagerly await book 2 with us. Goodbye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.